The pyramids rise from the desert with a silence that feels deliberate. Enormous shapes cut against the sky that still provoke the same question after thousands of years. Who built this, and why? In recent decades, a new answer has spread across books, videos, and late-night conversations. The claim that these monuments were not just tombs but beacons built for the Anunnaki, beings said to come from the stars. The idea is bold, dramatic, and powerful because it offers a shortcut through complexity. Instead of slow human labor, it gives advanced visitors. Instead of missing records, it gives secret knowledge. But bold ideas demand careful testing, and the pyramids are not empty of evidence. They are among the most studied structures on Earth. To understand whether a beacon story holds any weight, we have to step away from spectacle and return to method. What exactly is being claimed? What would a beacon mean in physical terms? And what kind of traces would such a device leave behind? The pyramids were built during Egypt's Old Kingdom, mainly in the 3rd and 4th dynasties, roughly between 2700 and 2200 BCE. This is not a foggy, prehistoric age, but a period with names, titles, tools, quarries, roads, and written records. The Great Pyramid of Giza is tied to the reign of King Khufu, who ruled around 2500 BCE. His name appears in worker graffiti inside the structure itself. Around the pyramids lie cemeteries for officials, temples for rituals, causeways, harbours, and the remains of entire worker communities. These are not scattered hints, but a connected system. The Anunnaki, by contrast, come from a very different place. They appear in Mesopotamian texts, written thousands of kilometers away, as gods within a religious worldview, not as engineers in a technical manual. No Egyptian inscription from the Pyramid Age mentions them, depicts them, or hints at their presence. That gap matters. A beacon is not an abstract idea. It implies function. It implies energy, transmission, materials, access points, and maintenance. If the pyramids were designed to signal across space, we would expect to see unusual materials, repeated modifications, or systems unrelated to burial and ritual. Instead, we find limestone, granite, copper tools, stone sledges, and architecture shaped by gravity and belief. This does not mean every question is answered. Archaeology is a living field, and debates continue about ramps, organization, and methods. But unanswered questions are not the same as unanswerable ones. In this investigation, the goal is not to mock wonder or strip away mystery. It is to test claims against what survives in stone, text, and ground. Awe should not replace evidence, and disbelief should not block inquiry. The pyramids deserve to be understood on their own terms, as products of human ambition, belief, and labour. If they were beacons, the proof must be physical and clear. If they were something else, that story must be faced honestly. The desert still waits, silent and filled with answers. When people say the pyramids were Anunnaki beacons, the claim often sounds simple, but it actually contains several separate ideas blended together. To test it, each part has to be separated and examined on its own. The first part is the Anunnaki themselves. In popular retellings, they are described as ancient visitors from another world who came to Earth in deep antiquity. They are said to possess advanced knowledge, superior technology, and a long-term interest in humanity. This image does not come from Egyptian sources. It comes from modern reinterpretations of Mesopotamian myths that were written in cuneiform on clay tablets beginning around 3000 BCE. In those texts, the Anunnaki are gods, part of a divine family, involved in creation, stories, law, and the ordering of the cosmos, not physical engineers building machines. The second part of the claim is the word beacon. A beacon is not a symbol, it is a device with a function. It is meant to send a signal that can be detected by someone or something else. That signal could be light, sound, heat, or some form of energy. For a beacon to work, it needs a power source, a method of transmission, and a clear purpose. It also needs access points for construction and repair. When people suggest the pyramids were beacons, they rarely explain what kind of signal was sent, who was meant to receive it, or why it needed to operate for thousands of years. These details matter because function leaves fingerprints. The third part of the claim concerns physical evidence. If a structure was designed as a signaling device, it would likely contain materials or features that do not match burial or ritual use. We would expect residues from energy production, unusual metals, repeated modifications, or internal spaces designed for maintenance rather than ceremony. In the pyramids, archaeologists instead find limestone casing stones, granite blocks placed where strength is needed, copper tool marks, and passages sized for human movement and ritual placement. Even the most mysterious features, such as narrow shafts and sealed chambers, show signs of symbolic meaning tied to Egyptian beliefs about the sky and the afterlife. Another important part of the claim is scale. Supporters often argue that the sheer size of the pyramids proves they could not have been built by humans alone. But scale by itself does not imply outside help. Large projects require organization, planning, food supply, and leadership. Egypt in the Old Kingdom had all of these. It had a centralized state, seasonal labor from the Nile floods, and a belief system that justified massive effort for the king. When we break the beacon idea into clear parts, something becomes visible. Each part depends on assumptions rather than evidence from the site itself. That does not mean questions should be ignored. It means they must be framed. Evidence must come first, and wonder must follow where facts allow. This approach protects curiosity while grounding discussion in what survives and can be tested. The Anunnaki did not begin as visitors from space. They began as gods, rooted firmly in the religious imagination of ancient Mesopotamia. Their name appears in some of the earliest written texts known to humanity, carved and pressed into clay tablets using cuneiform script. These tablets come from Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian cultures, beginning around 3000 BCE and continuing for many centuries. In these texts, the Anunnaki are a group of powerful deities connected to the heavens, the earth, and the underworld. They are part of a divine hierarchy, not a technical workforce. Their stories explain creation, order, kingship, and fate, not engineering projects or construction plans. In Sumerian belief, the universe was governed by gods who behaved in ways familiar to humans. They argued, made decisions, rewarded loyalty, and punished disobedience. The Anunnaki appear as judges of the dead, distributors of destiny, and servants of higher gods like Anu, Enlil, and Enki. Their power was symbolic and cosmic. When floods came, or cities fell, it was understood as the will of these gods. Temples were built to honor them, offerings were made to gain favor, and priests acted as intermediaries. None of this language suggests physical beings traveling between planets. It reflects how ancient societies explained forces they could not control. The confusion begins much later. In the 20th century, some writers began reading these mythological texts through a modern lens shaped by space travel, science fiction, and distrust of institutions. Figurative language was treated as literal description. Words like sky and heaven were reinterpreted as outer space. Divine tools became machines. Stories meant to convey moral or religious meaning were reframed as historical records. This shift did not come from new archaeological discoveries, but from reinterpretation. Egypt enters the picture even later. The Anunnaki belonged to Mesopotamian cultures, located in what is now Iraq, hundreds of miles east of the Nile Valley. Egyptian religion developed independently with its own gods, symbols, and cosmology. Ra, Osiris, Isis, Horus, and Anubis fill Egyptian texts and temple walls. The Anunnaki do not appear in Egyptian inscriptions, reliefs, or funerary texts from the Pyramid Age. This absence is critical. Egyptian scribes recorded extraordinary detail. They named kings, listed offerings, described rituals, and praised gods. If foreign divine engineers had shaped their greatest monuments, silence would be unlikely. Instead, what we see is consistency. Egyptian monuments reflect Egyptian beliefs. Mesopotamian myths reflect Mesopotamian beliefs. When these worlds overlap, it is through trade and diplomacy, not shared gods. Understanding the Anunnaki historically does not strip away mystery, it restores context. These gods were powerful within the minds of the people who worshipped them. They shaped law, kingship, and cosmic order. Turning them into aliens does not add clarity. It replaces ancient meaning with modern fantasy. To evaluate claims about pyramids and beacons, it is essential to keep cultures grounded in their own worlds. History becomes clearer when myths are read as myths, not misplaced machines. The idea that ancient gods were actually aliens is not ancient at all. It is a modern construction shaped by the 20th century, a time when rockets replaced myths as symbols of the unknown. After the Second World War, humanity entered the space age. Satellites, astronauts, and images of Earth from above changed how people imagined the universe. At the same time, trust in institutions weakened, and interest grew in hidden histories and secret knowledge. Ancient texts, once read as religious or poetic, were pulled into this new mindset. In the 1950s and 1960s, science fiction filled bookshelves and movie screens. Aliens became familiar figures, not monsters, but advanced visitors who might guide or exploit humanity. Against this background, some writers began to ask a provocative question. What if ancient people were not imagining gods, but describing real encounters using the language they had? This question did not come from archaeology or linguistics. It came from speculation. One of the most influential figures in spreading this idea was Erich von Däniken, whose book Chariots of the Gods appeared in 1968. He argued that ancient monuments were too complex for early humans and must have required outside help. He pointed to pyramids, stone circles, and myths of sky gods as evidence. His work reached millions and was translated worldwide, but specialists quickly noted problems. He often misunderstood sources, ignored context, and treated metaphor as fact. Despite criticism, the idea took hold because it was exciting and simple. It replaced slow cultural development with sudden intervention. Mesopotamian gods, like the Anunnaki, were pulled into this framework. In original texts, they lived in a layered universe of sky, earth, and underworld. In modern retellings, those layers became planets and spacecraft. Words like descended and ascended were stripped of symbolic meaning and treated as literal travel. Tools described in myth became machines. None of this came from new discoveries. It came from reading ancient texts without understanding how ancient people used language. Egypt became a central stage for this transformation. The pyramids were already famous, massive, and mysterious to outsiders. Their scale made them perfect candidates for alien stories. Popular media reinforced this image. Television, specials, magazines, and later internet videos repeated the same questions. How could people without modern tools do this? Why align structures with the stars? Why build so big? Each question was framed to suggest impossibility rather than ingenuity. Over time, repetition gave the appearance of evidence. Another factor was the loss of craftsmanship knowledge. In modern life, few people quarry stone by hand or move massive blocks without machines. Because these skills are rare today, they feel impossible in the past. This gap in experience fuels disbelief. Instead of asking how ancient societies organized labor, skeptics jump to outside help. The result is a chain reaction. Myths become misread, misreadings become popular stories. Popular stories become assumed truths. By the time Anunnaki are described as space engineers, the distance from the original sources is enormous. Understanding this process does not require rejecting curiosity. It requires tracing ideas back to their origins. When we do, we see that gods became aliens not because of evidence, but because modern culture needed a new way to express awe. Long before the pyramids rose above the Nile, Egypt was already changing in quiet but powerful ways. The land along the river supported farming villages as early as 5000 BCE. People learned the rhythm of flood and harvest, planting when waters fell and gathering before they returned. This steady cycle produced food surpluses, and surplus changed everything. It allowed specialists to exist, craftsmen, priests, administrators, and leaders who did not farm every day. Over time, villages grew into regional centers, and regional centers began to compete and cooperate. This period is known as predynastic Egypt, a time without pharaohs but not without order. Archaeology shows increasing social layers. Some graves were simple, others were rich with goods, stone vessels, jewelry, and imported materials. Power was already concentrating. Religion grew alongside politics. Early Egyptians believed life continued after death, and that the dead needed food, objects, and protection. Graves became markers of status and belief. Mud brick tombs grew larger. Offerings became more formal. Symbols appeared that linked leaders with divine forces. By around 3100 BCE, these regional powers united under a single ruler, traditionally identified as Nama. This moment marks the beginning of the early dynastic period. Egypt became a centralized state. The king was not just a ruler, but a sacred figure, responsible for maintaining Ma'at, the balance between order and chaos. His health and authority were tied to the land itself. When the king prospered, Egypt prospered. This belief justified immense effort in his service. Administration expanded rapidly. Writing developed using hieroglyphs for ritual and hieratic script for daily records. Officials tracked grain, labor, livestock, and land. This mattered because monument building is not just about stone, it is about organization. Early dynastic kings were buried in large tombs at Abydos and Saqqara. These were not pyramids yet, but they show a clear trend. Tombs grew larger, more complex, and more symbolic. Surrounding structures supported rituals for the afterlife. Retainer burials, later replaced by symbolic figures, show how closely death and kingship were linked. The idea that the ruler needed a powerful eternal home was already established. Religion reinforced this direction. The king was associated with Horus in life and Osiris in death. The afterlife was not abstract. It was imagined as a real continuation that required preparation. Tombs were designed as eternal houses. Materials mattered. Stone was seen as lasting and divine, unlike mud brick, which decayed. This belief would soon drive experimentation. By the time the Third Dynasty began around 2670 BCE, Egypt had all the ingredients needed for pyramids: a strong state, a sacred king, skilled labor, religious motivation, and centuries of gradual development. The pyramids did not appear suddenly. They were the result of long preparation, rooted firmly in human history. The first pyramids were not pyramids at all. They were mastabas, flat-topped tombs built from mud brick, shaped like long benches rising gently from the desert floor. Mastabas appeared during the early dynastic period and served as eternal houses for kings and elites. Inside, a burial chamber lay underground, while offerings were placed above for the spirit of the dead. These structures were practical, symbolic, and familiar to Egyptian builders. They followed techniques already used in houses, walls, and storage buildings. Nothing about them suggests sudden outside knowledge. They represent continuity. Over time, mastabas grew larger and more complex. Some were stacked, extended, or surrounded by subsidiary tombs. This steady change matters because it shows experimentation. Builders learned what worked and what failed. They learned how weight behaved, how walls cracked, and how materials aged in the sun. This knowledge accumulated slowly, passed from one project to the next. The turning point came during the reign of King Djoser, who ruled around 2670 BCE. Djoser wanted something different, something that would set him apart from all earlier kings. His chief official and architect, Imhotep, proposed a radical idea. Instead of mud brick, use stone. Instead of a single mastaba, stack them. The result was the step pyramid at Saqqara. It did not begin as a 6-tiered monument. Archaeology shows it started as a simple mastaba. Then it was expanded, reshaped, and expanded again. Each stage is visible in the masonry. This is critical evidence. It shows planning changed during construction. There was no fixed master design handed down complete. The builders adapted as they went. Stone brought challenges. It was heavier, harder to cut, and less forgiving than brick. Early stone blocks were small and laid like bricks, copying familiar methods. Over time, block size increased as confidence grew. The step pyramid complex included courtyards, temples, and ceremonial spaces all built in stone, but imitating earlier wooden and reed forms. Columns were carved to look like bundled plants. Doorways copied timber beams. This imitation reveals learning, not alien instruction. Builders were translating known forms into a new medium. Mistakes happened, walls cracked, sections were reinforced, solutions were developed. The step pyramid was not a perfect leap. It was a prototype. It proved that stone could be used on a massive scale. It proved that the state could organize labor, transport material, and sustain long construction. Most importantly, it left a visible trail of development. From mastaba to stepped form, from mud brick to limestone, the path is clear. Each choice follows the last. This progression undermines claims of sudden, advanced intervention. It shows human ambition reaching upwards step by step, learning through effort, failure, and refinement. The step pyramid stands as a record of process. It captures a moment when architecture crossed a threshold. It is not mysterious because it hides its past. It is powerful because it reveals it in stone, layer by layer, decision by decision. Nothing here requires forgotten science or visitors from beyond Earth. The fourth dynasty opened with ambition and risk. When Sneferu came to the throne around 2600 BCE, Egypt already knew how to build in stone, but it did not yet know how to perfect the true pyramid form. Sneferu would change that, not through a single, flawless design, but through repeated trial and error carried out on a national scale. His reign, marks the most important learning phase in pyramid construction. Sneferu ordered the building of at least 3 major pyramids, and each one reveals a different stage of understanding. The first was the pyramid at Meidum. It may have begun as a step pyramid, possibly started under a previous king, then altered into a smooth-sided form. At some point, much of its outer casing collapsed, either during construction or soon after. The ruins show that the structure was unstable. The angle was too steep, and the internal support was not sufficient. This was not a failure hidden from history. It stands as physical evidence of learning through loss. Sneferu did not stop. He moved north to Dashur and began again. The second project is now known as the Bent Pyramid. Here, builders adjusted the slope midway up the structure. The lower section rises steeply, then suddenly shifts to a gentler angle. This change was not symbolic, it was practical. Cracks appeared, stress built up, and the builders responded. They altered the design while the pyramid was still rising. The result looks strange, but it worked. The bent pyramid still stands because the builders chose stability over appearance. This decision shows awareness, observation, and problem solving. It also shows that the builders were present, monitoring their work, and responding to real physical limits. The final project of Sneferu's reign was the Red Pyramid, also at Dashur. This time, the lessons had been learned. The angle was set lower from the start. The base was carefully prepared. The internal chambers were designed to distribute weight more effectively. The result was the first successful true pyramid with smooth sides from base to peak. It did not require mid-course corrections. It did not collapse. It stands today as proof that Egyptian builders mastered the form through experience. These 3 pyramids form a sequence that no alien explanation can easily account for. If advanced knowledge had been handed down, there would be no need for visible mistakes. Instead, we see correction, adaptation, and improvement. We see a state willing to invest enormous resources into experimentation because the ideological reward was worth the risk. Sneferu's reign also shows administrative strength. Quarrying, transport, labor organization, and food supply all had to function smoothly for decades. This was not a sudden miracle. It was sustained effort. By the end of Sneferu's life, Egypt possessed the knowledge required to build the Great Pyramid. The learning curve was steep, costly, and human. It is written clearly in stone, not whispered from the stars. This foundation prepared the path for the next generation of builders ahead. Khufu came to power at a moment when Egypt was ready for its most ambitious test. He inherited the lessons of his father Sneferu, and a state that had learned how to think in stone. Around 2500 BCE, the resources of the kingdom were focused on a single goal: the creation of a monument that would secure the king's divine legacy and stabilize the cosmic order. The Great Pyramid was not a personal whim. It was a national project tied directly to royal ideology. In Old Kingdom belief, the king was the bridge between gods and people. His burial was not private. It was a matter of state security. If the king's passage to the afterlife failed, chaos threatened the land. This belief justified enormous effort. Administration made it possible. Egypt was divided into provinces, each responsible for providing labor, food, and materials during the annual Nile flood when fields lay underwater. Workers rotated in crews, leaving records of their teams and supervisors. Names scrawled inside the pyramid by these crews survive, linking real people to the project. The site at Giza was chosen carefully. It sat on solid limestone bedrock, close to the Nile, with access to quarries and transport routes. A harbour system connected the plateau to the river, allowing stone, food, and supplies to move efficiently. This was planning, not improvisation. The pyramid itself followed principles learned at Dashur. Its angle was stable. Its core stones were laid in horizontal courses. The fine white limestone casing came from Tura, while granite for the inner chambers was hauled from Aswan, hundreds of miles south. Such distances only make sense within a functioning state. The internal design reflects ritual needs. The ascending passages, the grand gallery, and the king's chamber align with ideas about ascent and transformation. Weight-relieving spaces above the chamber show practical engineering. They exist to redirect stress, not to hide machines. Around the pyramid rose a full complex, temples for offerings, causeways for procession, cemeteries for officials who wanted proximity to the king in death. This landscape shows purpose. Khufu's name appears on seals, in quarry marks, and in administrative records. He was remembered as a powerful ruler, not a stranger from legend. While later writers criticized him, archaeology shows continuity, not disruption. The Great Pyramid was completed within a single reign, likely around 20 years. That speed required discipline, not miracles. It required people who believed in the project and a system capable of sustaining them. When viewed in its historical moment, the pyramid is not an anomaly. It is the peak of a long development. It stands as evidence of what a unified society can build when belief, power, and organization align. Seen this way, the monument is not a question mark from the sky, but a statement from the ground, declaring that human systems, when pushed to their limits, can reshape landscapes, beliefs, and history without leaving their own world behind, through planning, labor, memory, and faith over generations together. The pyramids were not built by a hidden or unknown workforce. They were built by people whose lives left marks in the ground. South of the Giza Plateau, archaeologists have uncovered the remains of a planned settlement often called the Workers' City. This was not a temporary camp thrown together for slaves. It was a permanent, organized community with streets, dormitories, bakeries, breweries, storage rooms, and administrative buildings. Its layout shows intention. Workers lived close to the site, rotated in crews, and were supported by the state. The scale of food production alone tells a clear story. Excavations reveal massive bakeries capable of producing thousands of loaves a day. Bread was a staple, dense and filling, designed to fuel hard labor. Large vats indicate beer production, another essential calorie source. Animal bones recovered from the site show a diet richer than expected. Cattle, sheep, and goats were slaughtered regularly. This was not famine rations. It was planned nourishment for a valued workforce. Feeding thousands of laborers required logistics equal to quarrying stone. Records carved on papyrus and stone show how teams were organized. Crews had names, often symbolic or patriotic, tied to the king. Subgroups worked specific tasks, hauling, cutting, smoothing, or setting blocks. Supervisors tracked output. Injuries were treated. Skeletal remains show healed fractures and joint wear, consistent with heavy labor, but also signs of medical care. Broken bones were set. Teeth were treated. These people were not expendable tools. They were part of a system that needed them alive and productive. Tools found at the site match what is known from Egyptian technology: copper chisels, stone hammers, wooden sledges, ropes made from plant fiber, and wooden levers appear again and again. None require advanced machinery. All require skill, coordination, and experience. Wall reliefs from other sites show similar methods used in hauling statues and obelisks. large blocks were dragged on sledges over wet sand to reduce friction. This technique has been tested experimentally and works. The presence of administrative seals and storage facilities shows control and planning. Grain was collected as tax, redistributed as wages, in kind, and consumed by workers and their families. The Nile flood made this possible. When fields were underwater, farmers became builders. When waters fell, they returned home. This seasonal labor model explains how Egypt could mobilize tens of thousands without collapsing agriculture. The city at Giza was not unique. Similar settlements existed near other pyramid sites. Together they show a pattern. Monument building was part of the economy and belief system, not an interruption. Claims of mystery crews or unknown builders ignore this evidence. The remains are ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. Ordinary because they reflect daily life, cooking, sleeping, working. Extraordinary because they supported one of the largest construction efforts of the ancient world. When we look at the pyramids, the stones feel silent. But beneath them lies the noise of ovens, voices, footsteps, and labor. The builders were human, organized, fed, housed, and remembered in fragments of bone, brick, and ash. Moving stone was the real challenge of pyramid building, not imagination. Archaeology shows where the stone came from and how it traveled. Most of the Great Pyramid is built from local limestone quarried directly from the Giza Plateau. Cut marks and unfinished blocks remain in the bedrock itself, showing extraction on site. Higher quality white limestone for the outer casing came from Tura, across the Nile. Granite used in the king's chamber came from Aswan, far to the south. These sources are not guesses. They are confirmed by chemical matching and by ancient inscriptions left by quarry teams. One of the most important discoveries is the diary of an official named Mera, written around 2600 BCE. His papyrus records daily shipments of limestone by boat from Tura to Giza. It describes loading blocks onto barges, sailing along canals, and delivering stone directly to the construction site. This document anchors transport firmly in human systems. Boats carried stone during the flood season when water levels were high. Canals connected the river to the plateau. Harbours uncovered near Giza confirm this network. Once stone reached land, it had to be moved uphill. This is where ramps enter the discussion. No single ramp system has been universally accepted, and archaeologists are clear about that. What is supported is the use of ramps in general. Remains of ramps exist at other pyramid sites. Wall reliefs show sledges hauling heavy loads. Experiments demonstrate that teams pulling sledges over wet sand can move multi-ton blocks efficiently. The debate is about shape and sequence, not possibility. Some ramps may have been straight, running from the ground to the rising structure. Others may have wrapped around the pyramid or zigzagged along one face. A combination is also likely. As the pyramid grew taller, ramp systems could be modified or dismantled and rebuilt. This would explain why little remains today. Ramps made of mud brick, rubble, and sand would be reused or eroded. Inside the pyramid, logistics continued. Blocks were positioned using levers, rollers, and careful measurement. Builders worked in layers, leveling each course before moving upward. The precision achieved comes from repetition and control, not machines. Small errors were corrected immediately because each layer depended on the last. Archaeology does not claim that every detail is solved. It does show that every step fits within known ancient capabilities. Quarrying, hauling, lifting, and placement all leave traces. None require advanced alloys, engines, or energy sources beyond muscle, rope, wood, and water. The absence of a single perfect ramp model is not a failure of explanation. It reflects the reality of complex projects that evolve over time. The pyramids were built through adaptable logistics. Stone moved because systems existed to move it. When we follow those systems, the path leads through quarries, boats, ramps, and hands, not through mystery. Each discovery tightens the picture, replacing wonder with understanding, and shows that the greatest achievement here was coordination, patience, and belief working together across generations under demanding environmental conditions. To understand the pyramids, you have to go inside them. Not physically, but conceptually. The interior of the Great Pyramid is not chaotic or mysterious when viewed through engineering and ritual. It is a controlled response to gravity, weight, and belief. The descending passage begins near the original entrance and slopes downward into the bedrock. This passage reflects early burial traditions that placed chambers below ground. It also served a practical role during construction, allowing access before upper chambers were complete. Above it, an ascending passage branches upward, leading toward the heart of the structure. This split shows planning, not confusion. It marks a transition from older burial ideas to new ones. The Grand Gallery rises steeply, narrow and tall, with corbelled walls that step inward as they climb. This design reduces outward pressure and directs weight downward. It is not decorative. It is structural. The gallery likely functioned as a construction space, as well as a symbolic ascent, guiding movement toward the king's burial chamber. At the top lies the king's chamber, built entirely of granite. Granite was chosen because it is stronger than limestone and better able to bear immense load. The chamber sits near the center of mass of the pyramid, where forces can be managed most effectively. Above it are 5 relieving spaces, often called chambers, stacked one above another. These are not rooms for people or machines. They exist to redirect weight away from the chamber ceiling. This is clear engineering. Flat roofs crack under pressure. By layering spaces and topping them with angled stone beams, builders spread the load safely. This solution was learned through experience, likely informed by problems seen in earlier pyramids. The so-called Queen's Chamber sits lower and remains unfinished. Its purpose is debated, but its presence shows flexibility in design. Plans changed as construction progressed. Shafts extend from the chambers toward the outer faces. These were sealed and narrow, not suitable for access or maintenance. Their angles align roughly with specific regions of the sky as understood in Egyptian belief. The soul of the king was thought to travel among the stars, joining the eternal cycle. The pyramid interior supports this idea. It is a ritual machine, not a power device. Every passage is sized for human movement during construction and ceremony. There are no conduits for fuel, no sockets for components, no signs of repeated mechanical access. Tool marks show copper chisels and stone pounding. Blocks fit tightly because precision was required to keep the structure stable. When examined closely, the interior tells a single story. Egyptian builders combined practical knowledge with religious meaning. Gravity dictated form, belief dictated direction. Together they produced a space that is functional, symbolic, and human. The pyramid does not hide technology. It displays understanding. Each chamber answers a problem created by the one before it. This is how engineering grows. Step by step, shaped by limits, corrected by experience, and guided by purpose. It stands as proof of deliberate design under conditions. Few features of the Great Pyramid attract more speculation than the narrow shafts extending from the king's and queen's chambers. Often called air shafts. They have fueled claims that the pyramid functioned as a beacon or signaling device. To test this idea, the shafts must be examined as physical objects, not symbols. Each shaft is narrow, roughly the width of a human arm, and sealed for most of its length. 2 rise from the king's chamber and exit on the outer faces of the pyramid. 2 others extend from the queen's chamber, but do not reach the exterior. These facts are not debated. Their dimensions, angles, and endpoints are documented through exploration and robotic surveys conducted in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. The shafts are too small for regular human access and were never designed for maintenance. This alone raises problems for any beacon theory. A functioning signaling system requires upkeep, adjustment, and repair. The shafts offer no evidence of repeated opening or use after construction. There are no scorch marks, no residues from burning fuel, no traces of metal fittings or reflective surfaces. Their interiors are rough, consistent with stone cutting, not with polished channels meant to transmit energy or light efficiently. Supporters of the beacon idea often point to alignment. The shafts from the king's chamber angle toward regions of the sky associated with circumpolar stars, which never set below the horizon. In Egyptian belief, these stars represented eternity and rebirth. This interpretation fits known religious texts from later periods that describe the king joining the imperishable stars. The alignment is symbolic, not functional. A beacon would require precision aimed at a receiver, not a general region of the sky. The shafts from the Queen's chamber complicate the beacon argument further. They do not open to the outside. They end behind small stone doors fitted with copper handles. These doors were sealed from the start. If the shafts were meant to transmit signals, blocking them makes no sense. Their presence suggests ritual closure, not active use. Archaeological context matters. No similar shafts appear in later pyramids with the same function. Egyptian builders did not repeat the feature in a way that suggests a technical system. Instead, features change as beliefs and practices evolve. When technology works, it spreads. When symbolism shifts, forms adapt. The shafts belong to a moment in religious experimentation, not to a long-running machine. When compared to what a beacon would require, the mismatch is clear. There is no power source, no transmission medium, no access for operation, no evidence of output. What exists is stone shaped to express belief under strict structural limits. Gravity-constrained angles, weight-constrained size, ritual-guided direction. The shafts reflect all three. They are not vents, not conduits, and not antennas. They are expressions of cosmology carved into architecture. One of the strongest arguments used to support non-human explanations for the pyramids is their alignment. The Great Pyramid is oriented to the cardinal directions with remarkable accuracy, its sides pointing almost perfectly north, south, east, and west. To modernize, this precision feels impossible without advanced instruments. But ancient Egyptians did not build blindly. They observed the sky carefully and used repeatable methods grounded in astronomy and geometry. Alignment was not an accident. It was a religious requirement and a technical skill refined over generations. The most accepted explanation involves observation of the stars, not machines. In the Old Kingdom, the night sky played a central role in Egyptian belief. The northern sky, where stars never set, symbolized eternity. Aligning a royal tomb to the cosmic order reinforced the king's divine role. To find true north, surveyors likely used a simple but effective method involving circumpolar stars. By observing the moment when 2 stars aligned vertically as they rotated around the celestial pole, builders could mark a precise north-south line. This technique does not require lenses or clocks. It requires patience, clear skies, and repeated observation. Experiments using this method have shown it can achieve the level of accuracy seen at Giza. Tools recovered from Egypt support this approach. Plumb bobs, sighting rods, cords, and leveling instruments appear in tomb scenes and archaeological finds. These tools are simple, but simplicity does not mean inaccuracy. When used carefully and checked repeatedly, they allow fine control. The pyramids were laid out slowly, with the base leveled and corners fixed before construction rose. Measurements were checked and corrected early, when adjustments were still possible. Precision was built into the process, not imposed at the end. The alignment of multiple pyramids strengthens the case for human skill. The Great Pyramid, the Pyramid of Khafre, and the Pyramid of Menkaure all follow the same orientation pattern with slight variations. These differences likely reflect changes in stellar positions over time due to precession. This pattern suggests real observation, not a fixed external template. If alignment came from a single advanced source, uniformity would be expected. Instead, we see consistency shaped by time. Claims that alignment proves alien involvement overlook the broader Egyptian landscape. Temples, causeways, and cities were also aligned to cardinal points or solar events. This was a cultural practice, not a unique anomaly. Surveying knowledge was part of the state toolkit. It was taught, practiced, and refined because it mattered symbolically and practically. Aligning a structure helped distribute weight evenly and plan construction logically. When alignment is placed back into its historical context, it loses its mystery and gains meaning. The pyramids are precise because the builders demanded precision. They believed order in stone reflected order in the universe. Their methods were human, repeatable, and effective. The sky was their guide. The ground was their canvas. What remains today is not evidence of visitors from elsewhere, but evidence of what careful observation, shared knowledge, and disciplined labor can achieve when belief and skill point in the same direction. Star alignment claims surrounding the pyramids often focus on Orion and Sirius, two powerful symbols in Egyptian belief. The most famous idea suggests that the three pyramids at Giza mirror the three stars of Orion's belt, forming a ground map of the sky. At first glance, the pattern feels convincing. Humans are good at recognizing shapes, especially when we expect meaning. But archaeology and archaeoastronomy require more than visual similarity. They require context, consistency, and evidence that the builders intended the pattern. When examined carefully, the Orion correlation weakens. The positions of the pyramids do not match the stars precisely unless adjusted selectively. Scale is altered, angles are shifted, other stars are ignored. This flexibility allows almost any pattern to appear meaningful. Responsible study avoids this trap. Orion did matter in Egyptian religion. It was associated with Osiris, god of the dead and rebirth. Texts from later periods describe the king joining Osiris among the stars. This connection supports symbolic association, not architectural mapping. There is no Old Kingdom text stating that pyramids were laid out to copy Orion's belt. Egyptian builders were meticulous record keepers. When alignment mattered, it was usually stated clearly, as with solar temples or festival calendars. Silence here is meaningful. Sirius also appears in alignment discussions. The heliacal rising of Sirius marked the annual Nile flood and the Egyptian New Year. It was deeply important. Temples and monuments later in history show solar and stellar alignments tied to this event. The pyramids do not show consistent alignment with Sirius. Their orientations favor cardinal directions, not specific rising points. This choice reflects stability and cosmic order rather than seasonal markers. Archaeoastronomy acknowledges that ancient people watched the sky closely. It also warns against overinterpretation. Alignments must be repeatable across sites and supported by texts or iconography. Random chance and landscape constraints must be ruled out. At Giza, the plateau shape, bedrock quality, and sightlines influence placement. Builders worked within these limits. When patterns are proposed that ignore terrain, logistics, or cultural priorities, they drift into speculation. Pattern seeking is human nature. Faced with enormous monuments, the mind looks for hidden codes. But similarity is not intention. Egyptology builds its conclusions slowly, combining material evidence, inscriptions, and experimental testing. When these lines agree, confidence grows. When they do not, restraint matters. The pyramids already reflect the sky in clear ways. Their orientation to north ties them to the eternal stars. Their shape echoes the primeval mound of creation rising from chaos. These ideas are well supported. Adding complex star maps without textual backing does not strengthen the story. It distracts from what is already remarkable. The temptation of pattern can lead us away from evidence. Respecting ancient intelligence means taking their beliefs seriously as they express them, not as we wish them to be. When we do that, the pyramids remain connected to the heavens, but through meaning, ritual, and observation. Not hidden diagrams drawn for distant eyes, grounded firmly in human culture and careful scholarship. To understand what the pyramids were for, the most reliable source is not modern speculation, but Egyptian belief itself. The pyramids were built as part of a religious system centered on the afterlife and the divine nature of kingship. In Old Kingdom Egypt, the king was not only a political ruler, he was a sacred figure whose role was to maintain Ma'at, the balance of order against chaos. His death was a dangerous moment. If the transition failed, the entire cosmos was believed to be at risk. The pyramid existed to prevent that failure. Egyptian religion taught that life continued after death, but survival was not automatic. The body had to be preserved. The spirit had to be guided. Rituals had to be performed correctly and continuously. The pyramid was not just a tomb, it was the central engine of this process. Its shape symbolized the primeval mound, the first land to rise from the waters of chaos at creation. Rising upward, it represented ascent, rebirth, and permanence. The king's spirit, known as the Arch, was meant to ascend to the sky and join the gods. This belief appears repeatedly in later texts, but its roots stretch back to the Pyramid Age. The pyramid complex as a whole reveals its purpose. The pyramid itself was only one part. Nearby stood a mortuary temple where priests performed daily offerings. Food, drink, incense, and prayers were presented to sustain the king's spirit. A causeway connected this temple to a valley temple near the Nile, symbolically linking the world of the living to the world of the dead. Processions moved along this path during burial and festivals. Surrounding cemeteries held officials who sought proximity to the king even after death. This layout was intentional. It created a ritual landscape designed for repetition and continuity. The system only worked if maintained. Priests were assigned permanently to the cult of the dead king. Endowments of land and goods funded their work. Inscriptions record these arrangements. This long-term planning shows that pyramids were never meant to be sealed and forgotten machines. They were meant to function ritually for generations. The internal design of the pyramid reflects this goal. Passages guide movement. Chambers mark stages of transformation. Blocking stones seal the burial space, protecting the body while rituals continue outside. Nothing inside suggests communication with distant beings. Everything supports protection, symbolism, and controlled access. Even the alignment of the pyramid to the cardinal directions reinforces order. North represented eternity. Stability mattered more than spectacle. Egyptian texts that survive from later periods, like the pyramid texts carved inside 5th and 6th dynasty pyramids, make these beliefs explicit. They speak of ascent, of becoming a star, of joining the gods. While these texts were written after the Great Pyramid, they reflect ideas already present. Belief evolves slowly. Architecture often preserves older meanings before they are written down. When Egyptians explained their own monuments, they did not speak of energy or signals. They spoke of eternity, order, and divine transformation. The pyramids were ritual machines, not technological ones. Their purpose was to secure the king's place in the cosmos and, through him, the stability of Egypt itself. That purpose is consistent, documented, and deeply human. When discussing pyramid purpose, the pyramid texts are often treated as if they explain everything. They do not. These inscriptions appear later than the Great Pyramid and must be used carefully. The pyramid texts are the oldest large body of religious writing from ancient Egypt. They were carved on the inner walls of royal pyramids beginning in the late 5th dynasty, around 2300 BCE. This places them roughly 2 centuries after the Great Pyramid was completed. That gap matters. Ideas existed before they were written down, but texts reflect beliefs at the moment of writing, not frozen instructions from the past. The earliest pyramids, including those of Djoser, Sneferu, and Khufu, contain no inscriptions at all. Their silence is intentional. During the 4th dynasty, sacred knowledge was controlled and expressed through ritual, architecture, and priestly action rather than permanent writing. Writing inside tombs was not yet standard practice. The pyramid texts mark a shift. Religious language that had been spoken, memorized, and performed was now carved into stone. These texts describe spells, prayers, and declarations meant to guide the king through the afterlife. They speak of ascent to the sky, transformation into a star, union with gods, and protection from danger. None of this is technical. It is poetic, symbolic, and religious. The texts do not describe construction methods. They do not reference machines, signals, or external helpers. Their concern is the fate of the soul. Because the texts appear later, they cannot be used to explain every design choice of earlier pyramids. Some features may reflect older beliefs no longer emphasized. Others may represent architectural solutions developed before language caught up. Archaeology shows that practice often comes before explanation. Builders solve problems. Priests later interpret meaning. This sequence is common in human history. Another point often missed is variation. The pyramid texts change over time. Different kings emphasize different spells. Some pyramids include hundreds of utterances. Others include fewer. This flexibility shows that there was no single rigid blueprint. Belief adapted, architecture adapted with it. When people read later texts back into earlier monuments without caution, they risk creating a voids that the Egyptians themselves never made. The texts are valuable, but they must be anchored in their own period. They tell us how Egyptians understood death and kingship in the late Old Kingdom, not necessarily how Khufu's architects thought in detail. Importantly, the pyramid texts confirm continuity, not disruption. They reinforce ideas of divine kingship, cosmic order, and stellar destiny already visible in pyramid form and alignment. They do not introduce foreign concepts or sudden changes that would suggest outside influence. Using them responsibly strengthens the human explanation. It shows a culture refining how it expressed belief over time. The pyramids came first, the words followed. Understanding that order helps prevent confusion and keeps interpretation grounded in evidence rather than assumption. This distinction is essential when separating history from speculation and keeping claims testable within proper historical context and scholarly discipline at all times, for accuracy always. Claims of lost technology often begin with disbelief. The cuts are too clean, the stone is too hard, the precision is too exact. From this disbelief comes the suggestion that ancient Egyptians must have possessed advanced tools that vanished, or that someone else provided them. Archaeology approaches this problem differently. Instead of asking what feels impossible, it asks what is demonstrable. When we examine tool marks, unfinished work, experimental reconstructions, and ancient workshops, the picture becomes clearer and far less mysterious. Egyptian builders worked mainly with copper tools, stone pounders, wooden levers, sand, and time. Copper is softer than granite, but softness does not mean useless. Copper chisels were used to cut limestone, which is relatively soft. For harder stones like granite, builders used dolerite hammerstones to pound and fracture the surface. Thousands of these hammerstones have been found in quarries at Aswan. They are worn smooth from repeated impact. This method is slow, but it works. Experimental archaeology has replicated granite cutting using these exact tools. The results match ancient surfaces closely. Drilling is another common talking point. Core drills found in Egypt show spiral grooves that some claim require high-speed machinery. In reality, these grooves can be produced by hand drills using copper tubes, sand as an abrasive, and steady pressure. Sand does the cutting, not the metal. Experiments conducted by modern researchers have reproduced similar drill marks using simple setups. The process takes time and skill, which ancient craftsmen had in abundance. Precision is often misunderstood. The pyramids are precise at large scale, but they are not flawless. When measured closely, blocks vary in size. Angles differ slightly. Surfaces show correction marks. Precision was achieved where it mattered most, at the base, the corners, and the alignment. These areas were checked repeatedly because errors there would multiply. Elsewhere, tolerance was practical, not absolute. This is how real construction works. Claims of machine-like perfection collapse under close inspection. Another issue is hardness. Granite is hard, but hardness does not make it untouchable. With enough repetition, abrasion, and labor, stone yields. Ancient societies around the world shaped hard stone without steel or engines. What is often missing from modern discussions is appreciation for labor investment. Ancient projects were not rushed. The Great Pyramid took roughly 20 years, that is, millions of work hours applied to a single goal. When time is available, techniques expand. Lost technology arguments also ignore continuity. Egyptian stoneworking did not appear suddenly and then vanish. It evolved from earlier periods and continued into later ones. Quarries, tools, and methods persist through dynasties. Roman and medieval builders reused Egyptian stone and commented on its workmanship. There is no gap where advanced tools disappear without trace. If such tools existed, they would leave debris, broken parts, or transitional forms. None have been found. The idea of lost technology often reflects modern impatience. We expect speed. Ancient builders expected endurance. Their technology was not hidden, it was human. When experimental archaeology recreates their methods, mystery shrinks. What remains is respect for skill, planning, and persistence. The pyramids do not require vanished machines to explain them. They require acknowledging what coordinated human effort can accomplish when belief, organization, and time align under demanding conditions. To test the beacon idea seriously, the question must be turned around. If the pyramids were designed as signaling devices, what physical evidence would that leave behind? Technology, no matter how advanced, interacts with materials. It produces wear, residue, access points, and patterns of use. These traces persist even when the technology itself is removed or fails. Archaeology is skilled at finding such signatures. When we apply this standard to the pyramids, the results are clear. A beacon requires a power source. That power could be chemical, mechanical, or electrical, but it must leave signs. There would be fuel storage areas, residue from combustion, heat alteration of stone, or chemical traces absorbed into surfaces. None of these appear in the pyramids. The interior stones show no scorching, no melting, no vitrification, and no unusual chemical deposits. Limestone and granite behave predictably under heat. They crack, discolor, and fracture. These effects are absent. A beacon also requires transmission components. If light were involved, reflective surfaces or polished channels would be expected. The pyramid interiors are rough, where they are functional, and smooth only where ritual demanded it. No mirrors, lenses, or reflective linings have been found. If sound or vibration were used, cavities designed for resonance would appear. Instead, chambers are shaped to manage weight, not acoustics. Their dimensions vary based on structural need, not frequency. Electrical signaling would require conductive materials. Metals would need to be present in quantity, shaped consistently, and connected across spaces. What we find instead are copper tools and fittings typical of Egyptian craft, not wiring analogues or embedded conductors. Copper handles on small doors exist, but they are decorative and symbolic, not part of a circuit. Maintenance is another requirement. Any working device must be accessed repeatedly. This means doors, panels, widened passages, or signs of reopening. The pyramids show the opposite. Blocking stones were slid into place and left untouched. Passages were sealed deliberately. Some areas were never reopened in antiquity. There are no wear patterns from repeated traffic, no tool marks from later adjustments. The design prioritizes permanence, not operation. Context matters as well. If the pyramids were beacons, similar features would be expected elsewhere. Egypt built many pyramids over centuries. None show a progression toward improved signaling technology. There is no standardization of supposed beacon components. No repairs, no upgrades, no expansion. Technology spreads when it works. Here, there is nothing to spread. The surrounding archaeological record also fails the beacon test. Worker settlements, tool workshops, and administrative areas show no specialized industries that would support advanced devices. There are no waste products from complex manufacturing. Everything fits within known Egyptian practices. Even when modern teams have drilled, scanned, and mapped the pyramids using advanced instruments, no hidden machinery or anomalous materials have been found. The absence of evidence is not subtle, it is complete. When claims rely on what is not seen rather than what is present, they drift from testing into belief. The pyramids can be explained fully without invoking a beacon function. When we ask what evidence should exist and then look honestly at the record, the answer is consistent. The pyramids were not built to transmit signals outward. They were built to preserve order inward within a belief system focused on eternity, ritual, and the human need to make meaning from stone. When looking for evidence of the Anunnaki in Egypt, the most striking fact is not what we find, but what we do not. Ancient Egypt left behind one of the richest written and visual records of any early civilization. Temple walls, tomb reliefs, papyri, stelae, seals, and administrative documents survive in enormous quantity. Kings recorded victories. Priests recorded rituals. Officials recorded grain deliveries, labor assignments, and construction schedules. If non-human beings had guided or assisted in building the pyramids, their presence would be expected somewhere in this record. Instead, it is absent. Egyptian inscriptions name gods clearly and repeatedly: Ra, Osiris, Isis, Horus, Anubis, Thoth, and many others appear thousands of times. Their forms are consistent. Their roles are explained. Their relationships are defined. Foreign gods sometimes entered Egypt through contact and conquest, and when they did, they were identified and depicted. The Anunnaki never appear, not as visitors, not as teachers, not as divine overseers. Egyptian art is highly symbolic but also highly specific. When something mattered, it was shown. Workers are shown hauling stone. Overseers are shown directing labor. Kings are shown performing rituals. Gods are shown receiving offerings. There are no images of beings arriving from the sky to instruct builders or activate monuments. Administrative records reinforce this silence. Papyrus documents list workers, rations, tools, boats, and stone deliveries. The Diary of Mera records daily logistics in detail. Names of supervisors, crews, and destinations appear plainly. The system is human from top to bottom. No unexplained categories exist for special knowledge bearers or outside agents. Egyptian writing did not shy away from the extraordinary. Myths describe gods battling chaos, traveling through the underworld, and reshaping the cosmos. If Egyptians believed their monuments were built with help from powerful external beings, that belief would have been expressed mythologically, at the very least. Instead, creation stories focus on gods shaping the world at the beginning of time, not on later interventions in stone construction. Another argument sometimes says the Egyptians hid this knowledge deliberately, but secrecy still leaves traces. Hidden cults leave symbols. Forbidden beliefs leave hints. Rival traditions leave conflict. None of this appears. Across dynasties, the explanation remains consistent. The king commands, the state organizes, the gods sanction, the people build. Even foreign observers from later periods, such as Greek historians, recorded Egyptian explanations rather than alternative ones. Herodotus wrote about labor, ramps, and organization, not visitors from the sky. He repeated what Egyptians told him centuries after the pyramids were built. This continuity matters. Silence across so many sources is not an accident. It is evidence. When historians weigh claims, they look for convergence. Multiple independent sources pointing to the same conclusion. In Egypt, inscriptions, art, architecture, and administration converge on a human story. The absence of Anunnaki is not a gap waiting to be filled. It is a clear boundary set by the evidence. The pyramids belong to Egyptian culture, belief, and labor. Adding Anunnaki does not explain that record, it contradicts it. The Anunnaki beacon story did not grow out of ancient Egypt. It formed much later, when myths from one culture were lifted from their setting and stitched onto monuments from another. Mesopotamian religion developed in the river valleys of the Tigris and Euphrates, while Egyptian religion grew along the Nile. These civilizations traded goods and ideas at times, but they kept distinct gods, symbols, and worldviews. In ancient sources, their myths do not merge. The merging happens in the modern age. During the 19th and 20th centuries, scholars began translating Mesopotamian cuneiform tablets for the first time. Names like Anu, Enlil, Enki, and the Anunnaki entered popular awareness. These texts were complex and symbolic, describing gods who shaped order, judged the dead, and governed the cosmos. At the same time, Egypt already held a special place in the public imagination. The pyramids were famous, visible, and difficult to understand without study. This made them fertile ground for speculation. As modern media expanded, ideas moved faster than context. In books, television, and later the internet, fragments of myth were pulled out of their cultural frame. Sky gods became space travelers. Divine descent became spacecraft landing. Moral stories became technical reports. Mesopotamian gods were recast as universal beings active across the ancient world. Egypt, with its massive stone monuments, was drawn into this retelling as physical proof. The distance between cultures was ignored. Differences in language, religion, and time were flattened. What mattered was narrative impact. This process was accelerated by popular media formats. Short segments reward bold claims, not careful explanation. Images of pyramids paired with star fields suggest connection even when none is stated. Repetition reinforces belief. When the same idea appears in books, documentaries, and online videos, it begins to feel established. Over time, the original sources fade from view. The Anunnaki become detached from their Mesopotamian roots and reimagined as ancient astronauts who traveled freely between civilizations. Egyptology does not support this fusion. Egyptian texts explain their monuments using Egyptian gods and beliefs. Mesopotamian texts explain their world using Mesopotamian gods and beliefs. There is no ancient bridge between the two systems that resembles the modern alien narrative. The bridge is modern imagination. It reflects a desire for a single hidden story that explains everything at once. This desire is understandable. Complexity is hard. Human history is uneven and full of gaps. A unifying outside force feels satisfying, but satisfaction is not evidence. Myths do travel, but they travel through people, not through space. They change as they move, shaped by new fears, hopes, and technologies. In the modern era, space has become the unknown frontier, replacing the underworld or the divine sky. Gods have been refitted to match that frontier. When Mesopotamian myths are read carefully and Egypt is studied on its own terms, the fusion falls apart. What remains is not disappointment, but clarity. Each culture created meaning from its own land, tools, and beliefs. The pyramids do not need borrowed gods to be extraordinary. They are already powerful expressions of human imagination shaped by stone, ritual, and time. Archaeology does not claim to have solved every detail of pyramid construction, and that honesty is often mistaken for weakness. In reality, open questions are a sign of serious study, not failure. Scholars openly debate the exact form of ramps, the precise size of the workforce, and how labor was scheduled across seasons. These debates exist because evidence is incomplete, not because explanations are absent. There is a difference between unknown details and unknown principles. The principles of quarrying, transport, organization, and construction are well established. The uncertainties lie in how these principles were combined at specific moments. Ramp design is a good example. Archaeologists agree ramps were used, but they debate whether they were straight, zigzagging, wrapping, internal, or a combination that changed as construction progressed. Each model has strengths and weaknesses when matched against physical remains and logistics. The lack of a single preserved ramp does not imply impossibility. Ramps were built from mud brick, rubble, and sand, materials meant to be temporary. They were dismantled, reused, or eroded. Their disappearance is expected. Workforce numbers are another area of discussion. Estimates range from around 10,000 to 30,000 workers at peak times. These numbers depend on assumptions about work pace, block size, and seasonal rotation. What matters is not the exact number, but the structure. Evidence clearly supports a rotating labour force supported by the state, fed well, housed nearby, and organised into crews. Whether the total was 15,000 or 25,000 does not change the underlying explanation. Scheduling also invites debate. How were tasks sequenced? How much work was done during flood season versus dry months? How many years did each phase require? Papyrus records like the Diary of Mera give snapshots, not full calendars. Archaeologists fill gaps using comparison, experimentation, and modelling. This process is slow and careful. It is meant to narrow possibilities, not rush conclusions. Problems arise when gaps are treated as proof of something extraordinary. Absence of detail is not evidence of aliens. If every unanswered question justified outside intervention, no ancient culture could be studied seriously. History would collapse into fantasy. Archaeology instead builds explanations that grow stronger as evidence accumulates. When new discoveries are made, theories adjust. This has happened repeatedly in pyramid studies. Worker villages, harbour systems, tool workshops, and papyri have all refined understanding over the last century. None have pushed explanations away from human capability. They have pushed them toward clearer organization. Another important point is that ancient builders did not leave instruction manuals. Much knowledge was transmitted orally and through practice. This is true in many crafts even today. When that knowledge disappears, reconstructing exact methods becomes harder. Difficulty does not equal impossibility. Experimental archaeology has shown again and again that proposed methods work within realistic constraints. Scholars disagree about efficiency, not feasibility. Accepting uncertainty requires patience. It also requires resisting the urge to fill gaps with dramatic answers. The real story of the pyramids is not fragile. It does not depend on perfect knowledge. It rests on converging lines of evidence that point consistently to human ingenuity. Unfinished debates keep the field alive. They remind us that understanding the past is a process, not a revelation. The pyramids remain extraordinary not because they defy explanation, but because they continue to challenge us to explain them better without abandoning evidence or reason. The pyramids dominate the horizon, but the people who built them rarely enter the frame. Monumental dreams are often remembered through stone, not through the hands that shaped it. Archaeology pulls those hands back into view. Every block moved required planning, muscle, food, and care. Behind the royal vision stood thousands of workers whose lives were organized around the project. Quarrymen cut limestone from the plateau and granite from distant Aswan. Their work was dangerous and exhausting. Hammerstones shattered rock through repeated blows. Dust filled the air. Hands blistered and joints wore down. Haulers dragged blocks on wooden sledges, coordinating rhythm and strength. Teams had to move together because a single misstep could cost lives. Ropes frayed. Sand had to be watered constantly. This labor was physical and relentless. Planners and overseers carried a different burden. They measured courses, aligned corners, and tracked progress. Errors could not be hidden. A mistake at the base would rise with every layer. These officials balanced speed with safety, belief with reality. Scribes recorded deliveries, rations, and attendance. Their marks on papyrus and stone are quiet proof of order behind the effort. Cooks and bakers worked long hours to feed the workforce. Bread and beer were produced in vast quantities. Meat was prepared to keep bodies strong. Without steady food, construction would stop. Storage managers guarded grain. Brewers monitored fermentation. This invisible labor mattered as much as cutting stone. Medics also played a role. Skeletal evidence shows healed fractures and treated injuries. Broken bones were set. Infections were managed. Care kept skilled workers alive and returning to work. This challenges the idea of expendable labor. The state invested in people because the project demanded continuity. Workers lived in organized settlements near the site. Housing was basic but planned. Families were supported. Seasonal labor allowed farmers to return home after the flood. Participation tied communities to the king and the gods. Pride mixed with strain. The cost was not only physical. Time spent hauling stone was time away from fields and families. Bodies aged early. Some workers died young. Graves near Giza show modest burials, not nameless pits. These people were remembered within their communities. Calling the pyramids alien creations erases this human cost. It turns effort into mystery and suffering into spectacle. The monuments rise because people endured heat, weight, and risk for years. Their reward was belief in order and continuity. When we credit outside forces, we take that away. The pyramids are impressive because humans paid for them with work, care, and sacrifice. Recognizing that does not diminish the monuments, it restores their meaning. The stones stand because people stood together day after day, carrying a dream heavier than any block. When all the evidence is placed side by side, the pyramids resolve into something clearer than myth and more impressive than mystery. They were royal tomb complexes built to serve religious, political, and cosmic purposes within ancient Egyptian society. Their form emerged through experimentation. Their scale was achieved through organization. Their meaning was rooted in belief. Nothing about them requires outside intervention to explain. The earliest pyramids show trial and adjustment. From mastabas to step pyramids to true pyramids, each stage records lessons learned. Builders tested angles, materials, and layouts. Failures were visible and corrected. By the time of the Great Pyramid, Egypt possessed the knowledge needed to build at unprecedented scale. That knowledge did not appear suddenly. It accumulated across generations of craftsmen, planners, and rulers willing to invest in long-term goals. Engineering choices reflect this growth. Stone was quarried locally and transported using boats, canals, sledges, and ramps. Interior chambers were designed to manage weight and protect the burial. Alignment to cardinal directions was achieved through observation and surveying. These solutions match the tools and skills known from the period. They leave traces that archaeology can study and replicate. The pyramids also confirm the strength of the Egyptian state. Only a centralized administration could coordinate labor, food supply, housing, and materials for decades. Seasonal labor tied the countryside to the project without destroying agriculture. Records show rations distributed, crews organized, and progress tracked. Worker settlements reveal care, planning, and medical support. This was not chaos. It was managed effort on a national scale. Religion gave the project meaning. The king's role as guarantor of order, justified the cost. The pyramid complex functioned as a ritual system meant to operate long after burial. Temples, priests, and endowments ensured continuity. The pyramid itself symbolized creation, ascent, and eternity. Its alignment tied the king to the heavens. Its permanence expressed stability. Egyptian texts and art reinforce this interpretation. They describe gods, kings, and rituals clearly. They do not describe machines, signals, or visitors from elsewhere. When gaps exist, archaeology works to narrow them, not to leap beyond evidence. Open questions remain about exact methods, but the framework holds. Every new discovery strengthens the human explanation. The temptation to see the pyramids as something other than human often comes from underestimating ancient people. Their world lacked engines and electricity, but it was rich in time, belief, and cooperation. Those resources matter. The pyramids stand because thousands of individuals aligned their labor with a shared purpose over decades. That is the real achievement. When the pyramids are understood as products of evolving engineering and state organization, they become more meaningful, not less. They tell a story of ambition, faith, discipline, and endurance. They show what societies can build when ideas are strong enough to mobilize people and patient enough to outlast them. The pyramids are not unanswered questions pointing upward. They are answers written in stone, pointing back to the people who made them. The beacon story persists because the pyramids are overwhelming. Scale bends perception. Stone stacked higher than any building of its time invites disbelief. When something feels too large, too precise, too enduring, the mind looks for explanations that feel equal to the impact. Aliens, lost civilizations, hidden technology, all offer a shortcut past the slow work of understanding human effort. They turn patience into spectacle. Uncertainty plays a role as well. Archaeology explains much, but not everything. Gaps remain in how exactly tasks were sequenced or which ramp ran where. Those gaps become fertile ground for imagination. For some, an unanswered question feels uncomfortable. Myth fills the silence faster than research ever can. Modern culture also shapes the story. We live in an age defined by advanced technology and space exploration. When we look backward, we project forward. We imagine ancient people through modern limits. If we could not build this without machines, how could they? This assumption ignores differences in priorities. Ancient societies invested time where modern ones invest speed. 20 years of coordinated labor without profit, pressure changes what is possible. R is another force. The pyramids inspire wonder, and wonder seeks meaning. A beacon aimed at the stars feels poetic. It connects Earth to the cosmos and places humanity inside a larger drama. That story resonates because it flatters us and relieves us. If someone else did this, we are not required to fully understand it. The real story asks more of us. It asks us to accept that humans organized themselves to pursue an idea larger than any individual life. It asks us to see belief as a technology in its own right. The beacon idea also thrives because it spreads easily. It fits short formats. It pairs well with images. It does not require background knowledge. Evidence, heavy explanations move slowly and demand attention. In a crowded media space, speed wins. Repetition turns speculation into familiarity. Familiarity turns into assumed truth. None of this makes the story accurate. It makes it effective. The human explanation struggles, not because it is weak, but because it is demanding. It asks us to hold many factors at once: religion, labor, politics, engineering, environment, and time. It does not resolve into a single dramatic cause. It resolves into coordination. That can feel less exciting until you sit with it. When you do, it becomes more impressive than any beacon. Thousands of people believed strongly enough in order, eternity, and kingship to give years of their lives to stone. Administrators planned decades ahead. Craftsmen refined skills across generations. Communities supported a project whose end they would never see. That is rare. It is also fragile. Forgetting that humanity is capable of such things makes us smaller. The beacon story persists because it is easy. The real story endures because it is true. The pyramids do not need mystery to be meaningful. They are already proof that human imagination, when anchored by belief and sustained by organization, can reshape landscapes and outlast empires. Awe is justified. But awe does not require aliens. It requires looking honestly at what people can do together when they decide that meaning matters more than comfort and permanence, matters more than speed.